Hey, so this time we're going to talk about the auto-migrator. So the idea behind the auto-migrator is to make development as easy as possible. So when you're defining your tables or figuring out your data model, then you're adding columns, removing columns, changing column types, you could just modify your schema file, and then the auto-migrator will take care of applying that schema file to your database and getting it up to date. And auto-migration can be disabled when you go to production if you want to have a more controlled rollout when you deploy a new version of your app. Like maybe you want to write your own migration rather than having the auto-migrator take care of it. Because the auto-migrator does some things that you may or may not want, but are probably fine in development. So to show you some examples of that, let's go ahead and look at the auto-migrator. So we'll take a look at our Beat starter app that we've been working with. I've changed it a little bit to add this table here. So what this table is it's a table that reflects basically the database table that's in our schema. So for every column that the database table has, we have a HTML column, and then you can like add data, and it'll randomly generate data and fill in the table. So let me show you what that looks like. So SQLite has this thing called Pragma Table Info, which is essentially a table you can use to get information about tables in the database. So you say Pragma table select, I want to select column names and column types from Pragma Table Info, where the table name is some passed-in argument. For our case, the table name is test. So our app uses table and passes in table name test. And to render all the data, we just select all the rows from test. Cool. So what we can do here now is we can start changing columns. So we maybe change name to Bain, and now we see our app automatically refreshes and it has the new column name. Or we could even add columns. So like age is now suddenly there. So one thing to note is that if you rename a column, we don't actually know if you renamed it, right? So if you rename Bain back to name, it's going to see that as a remove and a replace. So you're actually going to lose the data for that. You'll just get ID, age, and name. So that's one reason you might want your own migration process when you go to production. Another thing to think about is, while I can add columns here or I can remove columns, if I add a column while there's data in the table, well, let's drop all the data first and make this not null. We have an extra comma, so that was a syntax error. We get this little syntax error here. Working on improving the error messaging, but let's take that out, and now syntax error is gone, and we refresh. So we could add like a not null constraint, and we're fine. But if there were data, and you add some new thing like age, integer, not null, well, this is going to fail, right? Because there's already data in the database, and if you're trying to add a column that's not null, we don't know what to set it to. So adding columns with the auto-migrator, you're going to have to specify either a default, I'll say they're 0 years old, either a default or allowed to be nullable. So that's another instance where, maybe you want to run your own migration script, but in development, like this is super handy. Yeah, and we can even add tables if we need to. So we got our new type, our new table, and instead of selecting from test, we'll select from foo. And let's see if that works. So we see now we only have the ID here, which foo only had ID. And just to show it is the foo table, yeah, we see I'm foo table. And then we could drop that table. Of course, we drop the table, our app doesn't know what to do, and our type generator doesn't either, but we can change it back to select from test. And table name test. And there we are. We're back again, back in business. Cool, so I hope that's helpful. Hope other people find the auto migrator useful, at least in the development process and when deploying, you know, writing your own migration scripts to ensure that you deploy to your users' apps safely. Yeah, just a reminder, so the auto migrator, if you didn't watch the first video, the auto migrator is a thing that's on by default when you set up a Vulcan app. So when you create your DB provider, you give it this content of your schema, which ours is in main.ts and called app schema. So we import app schema and we give the DB provider our schema content. And whenever this content changes, the page refreshes, the DB provider comes up, the DB provider opens your database, and then it applies your schema content. If you change the schema name and the schema name doesn't match what's already in the DB, it'll refuse to apply the schema. So for some reason you're, I don't know, switching to an entirely new schema, or maybe like you're developing multiple apps and they're all using the same like host and port, and for some reason using the same database name between apps, your two different apps won't clobber each other if they have different schema names. They'll throw an error saying like, oh, like you called it app foo schema and you're trying to request app bar schema. The database already has app foo, so we're not going to apply the schema. And if you want, and the DB provider, so there will be an option to disable auto migration in the upcoming next release. Cool. And if you want the code for all of this, I'm putting it up in GitHub under this repository Vulcan video series. Right now it has 2 commits. So one is the video 1 ending. So if you want to see all the code as it was by the end of video 1, you go here. This is the type SQL video. So if you want to see the final product of the code when using type SQL, that's here. And then there's a branch for the auto migrate example because we're going to return back to the type SQL base and then create a more complicated app. And auto migrate will be its own separate thing. So you can go to the auto migrate branch to see essentially the code that was used in this video. Thanks.